Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. In 2014, people in Scotland rejected independence from the United Kingdom by a margin of around 10 percentage points. But in June this year, they voted by a much bigger margin to remain within the European Union, when the rest of the UK chose to leave. The vote for Brexit has reignited the debate on Scottish independence by drastically changing what it means for Scotland to remain as part of a united kingdom. But other factors have also changed since 2014, including the economic prospects for an independent Scotland, with the country taking a big hit from falling oil prices. Our newsmaker today is Scotland, as we ask whether its future lies with the UK or the EU, and if it's time to hold another vote so its people can decide.
Do we control our own destiny as a country, or will we always be at the mercy of decisions taken elsewhere?
Scotland's independence streak is resurfacing. 3 months after the Brexit vote to leave the European Union, the United Kingdom isn't looking so united. Scotland voted 62 to 38% to remain in the EU on June 23rd. Now a referendum of a different kind could be back on the table in Glasgow, giving Scots the choice of breaking away from the UK and staying in the EU. A 2014 referendum on independence was 10% shy of making Scotland a sovereign state. Leaders of Scotland's independence camp say the Brexit vote could be the tipping point for another referendum to pass.
Do not let Scotland down now!
Meanwhile, Scottish leaders are considering alternative routes to maintain strong ties with the EU and to exert influence on the Brexit deal being discussed with Brussels.
I don't want another referendum. I'm sick of referendums. But having said that, if we did get another referendum, I might vote for Scottish independence next time around.
In Scotland, there's an overwhelming support for being in the EU.
So we could have a referendum.
Even before the Brexit vote, there was speculation as to what it could mean for Scotland's future in the UK. And the prospect of a referendum hasn't ended. Scotland's government is taking the temperature of its electorate. The latest polls suggest that the deep divide on Scotland's independence hasn't changed much in 2 years. But a more extensive online survey is being conducted and aims to reach 2 million people.
Though every single poll since the 23rd of June has shown support for independence higher than it was on the 18th of September 2014. And while I take nothing for granted, I suspect support for independence will be even higher if it becomes clear that it is the best or the only way to protect our interests.
At issue is last year's $15 billion budget deficit, partly due to a collapse in oil revenues. That's the equivalent of almost 10% of Scotland's GDP. The leading Scottish Nationalist Party has unveiled plans for a new social security bill to scrap the bedroom tax, a controversial measure which cuts housing benefits for those on welfare. And a new child poverty bill is in the works, which would introduce the first statutory income targets on child poverty in the UK. They're liberal measures at odds with the policies of the Conservative government in Westminster. The results from Scotland's mass survey, which serves as a litmus test for a second independence referendum, will be released in November. The future of Scotland and the UK itself oscillating between a thorny Brexit deal and a potential Scottish breakaway from the United Kingdom, a union that's lasted more than 300 years. Randolph Nogle, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from London is Brian Monteith. He's Communications Director for Global Britain, a group that supports Brexit. He's also a former member of the Scottish Parliament for the Conservative Party. And from Glasgow, I'm joined by Gordon McIntyre Kemp. He's the founder and chief executive of Business for Scotland, a pro-independence organisation. Okay, gentlemen, so let's just make absolutely sure and clear where the battle lines are so we have clarity in this discussion and debate. Let me start with you, Brian. So you're Scottish, you're pro-Brexit, but pro-Scotland remaining within the United Kingdom. In a sentence, tell me why.
Well, I actually think the European Union is a failing economic bloc, that it is better not just for the UK but for Scotland to reorientate towards global trade to the growing markets outside the EU, in Asia, in the Americas, and indeed even in Africa. And it makes much more sense for Scotland in trying to retrieve its desperate financial situation to strengthen the links with the UK, because in fact Scotland, of course, trades 4 times as much with the rest of the UK than it does with the EU. So it's important that we retain the link with the UK whilst looking more globally to the rest of the world.
OK, Gordon McIntyre Kemp, you're Scottish as well. Anti-Brexit, wanted to remain within the European Union, pro-Scottish independence.
Absolutely.
Tell me why you disagree with Brian.
Oh, well, I think it's stuff and nonsense that's just been said there. I mean, effectively, leaving the EU is not about trading with the rest of the world. Leaving the EU is about xenophobia. It's about an idea of Great Britain as this nation, this empire that no longer exists anymore. And I think that in terms of Scottish independence, what we really care about is actually making decisions here in Scotland. We look at the bespoke economic policies that Scotland needs in order to drive our economy forward. And we've been let down again and again by the distant, disinterested and frankly dysfunctional Westminster economic mismanagement of Scotland that have led Scotland, a nation with an embarrassment of riches in terms of economic assets, etc., to have this deficit, which is too high. Only decisions made in Scotland by Scots, for Scotland, for the people of Scotland and for our economy, whilst being international in our outlook and part of the EU, is going to actually be able to turn things around for us. If we stay married to the rest of the UK, then I'm afraid once Article 50 is enacted, once the Brexit negotiations start to go wrong, once trade barriers start to go up, I think Scotland's deficit will get much larger, not smaller, if we stay with the United Kingdom.
Brian, is xenophobia driving any of this?
I don't recognise any of that. I actually work around the world. I work in Botswana, Nigeria. I'm going to Uganda next month. I spend time in France. I work in London and Edinburgh. Xenophobia, I don't recognise that. What this is about is repatriating the opportunity to take control of all of the decisions we make. It's the sort of thing that you might expect a Scottish nationalist to be in support of. It would seem that Mr Kemp actually favours repatriating decisions to Scotland, but not away from Brussels to Britain. Now, it makes sense to me that if we are to control our own taxes in Britain, to actually strike trade deals, which the EU is very bad at doing, then we need to leave the EU so we can have those powers. Now, and of course, in that time, we would be devolving far more powers to the Scottish Parliament itself, because powers such as over the common fisheries policy, where we would have control returned to us, would then go to Scotland. So, in fact, Scotland would benefit in many areas because we would be outside the EU, striking new deals with the trading partners where the real growth markets are.
OK. Gordon, so exchanging a tyranny of Westminster for a tyranny of unelected bureaucrats in Brussels?
Yeah, in terms of our elected bureaucrats, we've got nearly 800 members of the House of Lords who are unelected people who have a vote on every single law that affects Scotland. I'm
Many of them
interested
Scots.
in actually bringing power. None from the Scottish National Party, which actually has won the last several elections here in Scotland. I don't think anyone could ever think of a modern democracy and look at the House of Lords and actually say that the EU is less democratic. They're not necessarily any more bureaucratic either. At the end of the day, Scotland sees itself as a nation with an international outlook. We're not looking to do trade deals just with the EU. The EU has actually a single market that's actually vital. If we don't have free access to that market, then 42% of Scotland's exports go there. Scotland exports more per head than the rest of the United Kingdom. We export, £125 per second of whisky from Scotland to the rest of the world. We cannot see barriers to that trade brought in.
Brian?
If Scotland were to leave the UK before we've actually concluded our Brexit negotiations, then it would be doing so without knowing what our Brexit conclusion may be, which may, of course, be preferable to our current arrangements. It would not be in a position, because it would not be possible to negotiate its own entry, because the EU has made it clear it will not negotiate twice at the same time. It would not be able to offer the Scottish people a position about what entry to the EU would mean. So they would be voting blind. So you'd need a second referendum to then discuss what had been negotiated.
Fair point. I just want to
Very unlikely.
I want to go to Gordon and look at what the polls are actually saying right now, because there seemed to be this spike, this surge in Scottish nationalism in the immediate aftermath of Brexit. And that's when First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said, hey, we want another referendum. But now the polls seem to suggest that just like in 2014, the majority of Scots would vote to remain within the UK. How do you feel, given that those polls suggest that, hey, even if you push for it, you're going to vote to remain?
Well, Imran, it's not necessarily the case that the polls spiked as high as some of the papers were saying. The poll that everybody wrote about was an online poll, and they're not very reliable. We are seeing polls showing 47% for independence, but I don't think those are actually worth looking at right now, because the UK government doesn't actually know what's going to happen. It's at sixes and sevens around the sort of trade deal that we'll actually have. It's not until Article 50 is enacted, and following that, we start to see the trade negotiations, or not the trade negotiations, but the Brexit negotiations start to go wrong. When we start to get a feel for that, people will begin to understand just how damaging that Brexit can be for Scotland. And it's at that point that I would expect to see people begin to understand that independence is a positive option. Right now, there's actually far more risk for Scotland staying with the United Kingdom as it leaves the EU than there would be for an independent Scotland to be a member of the EU, and by virtue of being a member of the EU, have a single market deal with the rest of the UK. That is the best of both worlds. It's really what we need to aim for. And in terms of powers, more powers, etc. As an independent nation, we'd have about 95% control of our sovereignty. Right now, we have zero, because everything we have in the Scottish Parliament is given to us by Westminster, and it could technically be taken away at any point. So Scotland having more control as an independent nation and partnering with other nations rather than isolating ourselves, and I think nationalist isolationists, that's what drove Brexit. And Brian himself may not be xenophobic, fair enough, but I think you just need to look at the headlines of some of the papers that were driving Brexit, just to see how much, just to see exactly how much xenophobia, anti-immigrant hatred, etc. they were stirring up. It was an absolute disgrace.
Okay, Brian, the issue of sovereignty, the principle of sovereignty, not wanting to be controlled by other people, that's by and large what drove many people to vote for Brexit. Why can't you accept it and recognise it for those within Scotland who want to break away from the United Kingdom?
I don't think it's to do with xenophobia, though. If there's been any spikes, it's been in Scotland following the independence referendum, when there was a spike in bitterness and division towards English people staying in Scotland. That's the spike that we witnessed, and that's a spike we'd no doubt see again. So when we talk about xenophobia, what we see is actually people simply saying, we want to control our taxes, we want to control our laws. And of course, were an independent Scotland to remain in the EU by some manner or other, it would of course then lose its sovereignty that it would have gained by remaining in the UK. Outside the EU, it would lose its sovereignty to the European Court of Justice, just as the European Court of Justice has made rulings, for instance, on its laws in Scotland about the price of alcohol. So let's be clear. If Scotland was to join the EU, it would mean a hard border between Scotland and England. England and the rest of the UK being its largest market. Now, who would seriously consider doing that? It's preposterous.
Final response from Gordon. We're running out of time, Gordon. Final response.
Well, first of all, the anti-Englishness, that is just the sort of stuff that drags this debate into the gutter. I'm from Hexham in Northumberland. That's my hometown. I used to be a Conservative. I used to be a Unionist. I came to Scotland. I began to see the truth and I changed sides. There is no anti-Englishness driving Scottish independence at all. It's an embarrassment that people would actually say that. In terms of a hard border, first of all,
well, many people think otherwise.
The EU. They wouldn't be joining the EU, would be staying a member of the EU. Guy Verhofstadt, who is the EU's chief negotiator, has said he sees no obstacle to Scotland staying in the EU if we vote to become an independent country. And as for the hard border, well, Brian says there'll be a hard border. That's one of these myths that's been completely debunked, because you just need to listen to what Theresa May said about Ireland and Northern Ireland. She said there will be no hard border there. So there'll be a hard border in Scotland, but not one between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland. Come on, we've had all this before. It's time to start negotiating like adults. It's time to find the best deal that we can and stop slagging Scotland off, stop putting Scotland down, and let's get the powers that Scotland needs to drive its economy forward and no longer stay tied to the economic straitjacket of Westminster incompetence.
Unfortunately, I've got to wrap. I've really enjoyed this, gentlemen. Thank you very much. It's been riveting. Brian Monteith and Gordon McIntyre-Kemp. Thanks so much. Speak to you soon.